Hey guys! Tonight we're going to drift through time and myth right into the heart of ancient Greece. Not into the chaos of war or the drama of gods turning into swans, but something far more essential where people and sometimes gods laid down their heads for the night. Picture this soft torchlight flickering on polished stone, warm olive oil in the little clay jars, and the faint scent of honey cakes wafting from a hearth nearby. A quiet breeze ruffles linen curtains as sandals are set aside, and you sink, yes, you into a pile of woven mats beside a clay amphora. You're not a soldier or a priest tonight. You're a weary traveler, and you've found a place to rest. But be warned if you mess this up. Zeus himself might smite you. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I love seeing sleepy historians from across the globe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink as you walk beneath the blue twilight of the Greek countryside. Stones crunch underfoot and the scent of thyme and distant sheep hangs in the air. It's been a long journey. You're imagining bread and a place to lie down. And you're not the only one. Even the gods, in their infinite power and divine drama, appreciated a good nap. Take Zeus, king of Olympus, hurling thunderbolts and fathering half the population. He was also known to rest in high sanctuaries, wrapped in golden linens, dreams wrapped in prophecy. In fact, myths tell of great temples where the gods themselves were invited to lie down. Sacred sleeping chambers at Ida where mortals could dream beside their deities, hoping for guidance or healing. The gods didn't just crash anywhere, their beds were ceremonial, symbolic, fluffy unknown, but definitely honored. Of course, not all divine sleep was peaceful. Dionysus, for example, might wake up next to a goat in a broken amphora with no memory of how the party ended. Historians still argue whether his temples functioned more like nightclubs or sanctuaries, possibly both. You pause beside a stone pillar overgrown with ivy. Someone scratched a message into it centuries ago. Xenos slept here. Xenos meaning guest or stranger, the root of hospitality itself. See, in ancient Greece, Xenia wasn't just good manners. It was sacred law. Welcoming a stranger with food, water, and shelter wasn't optional. It was a moral contract blessed by Zeus Xenios, patron of hospitality. Turning someone away could bring divine wrath. Welcoming them could bring unexpected blessings, or at the very least, juicy gossip. There's a delightful tale about Baucis and Philemon, two elderly villagers who welcomed a pair of scruffy travelers into their humble home. They shared bread, wine, and stories, and then watched in awe as their guests revealed themselves to be Zeus and Hermes. Because of their kindness, the couple's little hut was transformed into a golden temple, and they were granted a shared death so they'd never be apart. Sweet, huh? You wouldn't get that kind of reward from today's motel minibar, but the lesson was clear: be a good host, or risk missing out on miracles. Also, maybe don't judge travelers by their shoes. Hermes was famously stylish, but his disguises? Not so much. You make your way past a pair of grazing goats and spot a house low, whitewashed walls, clay tile roof, flickering light through the shutters. You knock, and an old woman opens the door. No questions. She nods and ushers you in. The floor is dirt but clean. A fire crackles. She offers you wine mixed with water, a piece of bread with olive paste, and a place beside the hearth. You thank her, lay down your travel bag, and finally exhale. Because tonight, You're not out in the wild hills. You're under someone's roof. And in ancient Greece, that means you're protected by more than just walls. You're under the watchful gaze of the gods. The embers pop softly beside you, and the scent of charred olive wood mixes with the warm bread in your hands. You glance around the room, rough stone walls, a ceiling draped with dried herbs and garlic bulbs, and a cat blinking at you from atop a basket. The old woman has already curled up near the fire, snoring softly, wrapped in a faded wool blanket. This isn't luxury, but it's safe. It's sacred, because you've entered the realm of Xenia, that unique Greek blend of etiquette, reverence, and practicality that treated guests as gifts from the gods. And tonight, you are the gift. Try not to snore too loud. From the outside, it may seem like a simple tradition, be nice to travelers. But in ancient Greece, this was a cosmic agreement. Hosts were expected to feed and shelter strangers without even asking their names until after dinner. Guests, in turn, were expected to be respectful, not overstay, and preferably not rob the pantry. Imagine the dynamic today. Someone rings your doorbell. You immediately offer them soup, and only after dessert do you ask, "So, who are you?" The Greeks would think Airbnb was a tragicomedy. You roll onto your side and stare at the flickering firelight as shadows dance across the beams. The Greeks believed hospitality wasn't just kindness, it was justice. And like all good justice systems, it came with consequences. Violate Xenia, and you risked invoking the fury of Zeus Xenios himself. There's even a tale in the Odyssey that proves just how seriously this was taken. Remember the suitors who camped out in Odysseus's home while he was away, eating his food, drinking his wine, and pestering his wife? Classic breach of Xenia. And how were they punished? Oh, just a little light slaughter. You know, very reasonable. Historians still argue whether these rules of hospitality evolved from survival needs, like ensuring wandering farmers wouldn't freeze to death, or from a deeper social mechanism meant to build alliances and trust across city-states. The truth, probably both. Because when the terrain is rocky, the roads are long, and bandits are real. Having a guest code enforced by Zeus sounds pretty good. You shift on your mat, adjusting your borrowed linen pillow. There's something ancient and satisfying about knowing this isn't just a story, it was a way of life. Every stranger was a test, every door a potential shrine. And while the gods were watching, so were your neighbors. In fact, some towns had guest halls maintained by the city where travelers could stay, like a divine community center. And not all guests were equal nobles, and envoys got extra olives, and of course. But the principle remained hospitality. Always. Even the poorest peasants were expected to share what they had. There's a poem that tells of a man who offered only figs, water, and his warmest blanket to a passing wanderer who turned out to be Apollo in disguise. Spoiler, that guy ended up with a very well-tended orchard and a sudden boost in charisma. The fire pops again, and you drift into half-sleep. And just as your mind softens, imagine this. A weary god, unshaven and travel-worn, knocks on a farmhouse door in the hills of Arcadia. The farmer, grumbling, lets him in, offers barley soup and a stool. No fanfare, just warmth. In the morning, the guest leaves behind a single coin, ordinary at first glance. But when placed in the sunlight, it glows faintly and hums like a lyre. The farmer plants it in the garden. 3 days later, an olive tree blossoms overnight, heavy with fruit. You smile in the dark, because in a world without room service, you never know when your guest might be divine. The fire has dwindled to glowing coals, and dawn spills a pale gold light across the stone floor. You stretch, quietly, careful not to wake your host. But in your mind, the stories haven't stopped. They swirl like olive oil over water, especially the ones where the gods walked among mortals to test them. Because you've heard the tales. Zeus and Hermes, those two had a habit of showing up unannounced, dressed like drifters, dusty from the road, faces hidden under travel cloaks, and they weren't looking for free food. Well, maybe a little but mostly, they were measuring hearts. In one of the more famous stories, the gods descend upon a Phrygian village in disguise. House after house turns them away, locked doors, cold shoulders, averted eyes, until they knock on the humblest hut in town. There, an old couple, Baucis and Philemon, greets them with warmth. Goat stew and homemade wine diluted just right. They even chase their only goose unsuccessfully to offer it as a meal. Touched by their kindness, the gods reveal themselves. In a flash of thunder and radiant light, the hut transforms into a temple, and the old couple is spared from the flood that drowns their entire town. As a final gift, they're turned into intertwining trees, so they'll never be separated even in death. Not a bad trade for some goat stew. You walk out into the village, still sleepy-eyed, and notice the first rays hitting the top of a marble pillar. It casts a long shadow across a dusty path lined with fig trees. Maybe, just maybe, those gods walk this way still testing travelers, or waiting to be tested themselves. What's remarkable is how often these tales pop up across Greece. Zeus didn't just rule from the skies, he liked to wander. You could find him disguised as a beggar, an old man, even a merchant. The moral was always the same: show hospitality, even when you think no one important is watching. And Hermes loved a good undercover operation. Historians still argue whether he visited more mortal homes than temples. As the god of travelers and messengers, it was practically in his job description to pop by, unannounced, and sample your olives. There's one lesser-known tale. Barely preserved in a fragment of papyrus, a woman in Thebes shelters a strange young man during a storm. He's witty, oddly well-spoken, and keeps stealing her figs. When he leaves at dawn, she finds a golden feather on her doorstep, and all her livestock mysteriously doubled. Scholars debate whether this was Hermes or just an unusually generous con artist. You smile at the thought, because these myths aren't just about hospitality. They're about the power of the unseen. The idea that the world is full of hidden tests, and that kindness to strangers, to wanderers, even to the oddly chatty man with dusty sandals, is rewarded in ways you can't expect. You wander a little farther, past houses with clay pots out to catch the morning dew. An old woman sweeps her doorstep, pausing only to hand you a fig wrapped in a vine leaf. No words, just a nod. And just like that, the chain continues. From myth to moment, from old scroll to shared breakfast, because the best kind of hospitality isn't showy. It's soft, instinctive, warm like sun-warmed stone. And it lingers, like the scent of time on your hands, like a tale retold long after the gods have left the room. You continue walking, the early morning air crisp against your face, cicadas still rubbing their knees somewhere out in the fields. Ahead, a small structure comes into view, a weathered inn-like shape, squat and square, nestled beside a fig orchard. Not exactly glamorous, but inviting in its own lopsided way. You push the wooden door and it creaks like an old lyre string. Inside, the air smells of thyme and old cheese. A man snoozes at the far end of the room, mouth open, one sandal off. There's a bench against the wall and some cushions that have definitely seen better centuries. A pitcher of watered wine sits on a shelf with a half-eaten barley cake beside it. No innkeeper in sight, just a charcoal scribble on the wall. Rest here. Pay with story. You sit would, of course. This might be your first unofficial hotel. In ancient Greece, especially during the archaic and early classical periods, there wasn't a formal system of inns the way we think of them today. There were rest stops often connected to temples, sacred groves, or friendly households, and sometimes, if you were lucky, they had benches and cheese. Sometimes they had rats and fig thieves. It was a gamble. Historians still argue whether these stops were truly public institutions or just tolerated squats with decent PR. But the truth is, in a time when gods could walk in as guests and strangers were treated like ambassadors, there was a system. Just not one with check-in desks and towel carts. You lean back, eyes tracing a spiderweb stretched across the ceiling beams, and imagine the travelers who came before you. Soldiers, philosophers, grain traders, runaway lovers, priests with mysterious scrolls, all united by sore feet and the desperate need for a nap. One myth tells of a rest house built beside a spring sacred to Artemis. It had no door. Instead, it relied on an enchantment only those in need of genuine rest could find it. Others passed right by, seeing only a grove of cypress trees. One day, an exhausted woman with a sick child stumbled into its clearing. She slept for 3 days while the spring bubbled beside her. When she woke, the child was well and a silver coin lay on her chest. No one saw her enter. No one saw her leave. Probably the best reviewed stay in prehistory. You shift on the bench and realize something curious. This humble resting place, with its mismatched cushions and lukewarm wine, holds power. It may not look like much, but it carries tradition. A place to sleep, a roof to dream under, and maybe some sacred dust left behind by the gods who passed through before. Over in the corner, the dozing man snorts himself awake. He sees you, blinks, and grins. You look like someone with a good story, he mumbles. You raise an eyebrow, nod slowly, and reach for the barley cake. Because in ancient Greece, payment didn't always mean coin. Sometimes it meant sharing a myth. Sometimes it meant singing a song. And sometimes, all it took was being present, being here, under a roof meant to welcome the weary. And so you begin your tale, not with war or conquests, but with kindness, with benches and cheese, with olive groves and whispered legends. Because somewhere between the temple and the tavern, Greece gave birth to something gentle, something sacred, the very first hotel. The man across the room leans back on his elbows, eyes half-lidded, listening. You talk quietly, the way people do when dawn still clings to the edges of the sky. Your voice blends with the creak of wood and the soft chirping of birds outside. The story you're telling, not even your own. You're just passing it on. That's what people did here. You hear your own words form. And in the Iliad, even kings had to offer food and a bed before talking war. He nods like he's heard it before because of course he has. The Iliad isn't just a war epic. It's a sleepover manual with occasional sword fights. Homer made sure to emphasize the rituals around rest washing the feet of a guest, feeding them roasted meat, offering warm blankets before asking, "So, why exactly are you here to murder us?" Yes, even enemies followed protocol. Remember Diomedes and Glaucus? Two warriors mid-battle realized their grandfathers were friends. So instead of fighting, they swap armor and share a chat. Hospitality trumped bloodshed. Historians still argue whether that moment was metaphor, a diplomatic ideal, or just ancient bros vibing over bloodlines. Maybe all three. You trace your finger along the grain of the wooden bench and think about those scenes, about how even in the heart of conflict, rest came first, even in the Odyssey. Odysseus is constantly offered food and shelter before being interrogated, though. To be fair, he does have a habit of crying into his wine before telling anyone his name. That's the thing, beds, benches, and bread were sacred. You glance toward the hearth, imagining how these spaces must have glowed centuries ago. Not much has changed, really. A few fancier pillows, perhaps. Fewer goats inside the house. But at its core, still the same idea: safety, warmth, and the gentle pause between journeys. There's an old line, often misquoted: first we feed the stranger, then we ask their name. It's more than a custom. It's a philosophy. One you feel settling into your bones like the heat of morning sun. Outside, you hear distant bells. Maybe goats, maybe temple priests. Hard to tell. Either way, it's time to move. You thank the sleepy man. Leave a coin beside the wine jug and step out into a world buzzing with dew and light. And as you walk, your thoughts turn again to Homer, to his long musical verses, to the scenes between the battles, the quiet ones. Achilles, wrapped in a heavy cloak, staring at the sea. Nestor offering a stool and honeyed wine to a guest who might be a god. Helen, weaving a tapestry late at night, her thoughts far away. These weren't just filler moments. They were windows into how the Greeks lived and rested. The simple acts: pouring wine, washing feet, sharing bread, were proof of civilization. Because in a world full of monsters, gods, and storms, a good nap mattered. So you keep walking, past fig trees, past humming bees, toward whatever town lies ahead, knowing that somewhere, someone will have a bench, a cushion, and a story waiting. And maybe, if you're lucky, a piece of roasted cheese. You follow the road as it curves past a row of low stone walls and olive trees, the leaves flickering silver in the early light. A few farmers wave without breaking stride, wicker baskets balanced on their hips, tunics dusted with flour or soil. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks at absolutely nothing, as is their eternal right. The path splits near a columned temple, humble by Olympian standards but proud in its presence. A low flame flickers within a sacred fire, tended day and night. You step inside, quiet by instinct, and there she is, or rather, her presence: Hestia, goddess of the hearth, the home, and the quiet rituals of daily life. No thunderbolts, no battles, just warmth. Hestia rarely appeared in Greek myths with dramatic flair. But make no mistake, her influence was everywhere. Every home had a hearth in her honor, every fire lit in her name, and every guest welcomed under the watchful gaze of her invisible, comforting spirit. You sit near the flame, not too close, just enough to feel its warmth in your toes. A priestess in soft saffron robes tends to a simmering pot of barley porridge, humming a melody older than writing. She doesn't speak, but you feel acknowledged. This is what sacred looked like in ancient Greece. Not just grand temples and marble, but this a fire that never dies. A stranger given warmth, a quiet space to breathe. Historians still argue whether Hestia had temples in the formal sense. Many believe she didn't need them. She was the temple, wherever a hearth burned, which made every inn, every kitchen, every rest stop a holy place. Even war camps lit a Hestian flame before battle. Even way stations in the mountains carried a small altar in her name. You lean back against the cool wall, watching the priestess add herbs to the pot time. A pinch of dried fig, maybe a whisper of onion. It smells safe, like stories passed down over soup, like childhood, like someone remembering you even after you've left. A traveler enters tired, dusty, eyes darting. Without a word, the priestess gestures to the bench. The same welcome you received. No need for names and no status checked. Just a seat and warmth. And here's the beauty of Hestia: she never left Olympus to stir drama. She stayed by the fire, always present, always calm. In fact, she gave up her throne among the 12 Olympians so Dionysus could join the party. That's right. The goddess of stillness made room for the god of chaos. Now that's hospitality. You wonder how many generations of travelers sat here. Like you, watching the same flame flicker. How many whispered thanks? How many stories were passed along from bench to bench, with steam rising between sentences? Eventually, the priestess ladles porridge into a clay bowl and hands it to you. Still no words, but that look, half a smile, half a farewell, says everything. You eat slowly, not because you're hungry, but because this moment feels like a blessing disguised as breakfast. When you rise to leave, you nod your thanks. The priestess returns to the fire, and Hestia, she stays right there, as always, waiting for the next soul in need of rest. Outside, the sun's fully risen now, casting long shadows and turning the whitewashed walls of the village golden. You pass a fig vendor arranging their fruit, just so like tiny suns in a woven basket, and a boy chasing his goat through the dusty square. It's a peaceful kind of bustle. Everyone has somewhere to go, but nobody seems to be in much of a hurry. Your sandals scuff against the earth as you follow a winding road that leads past the market, past the grapevines clinging to stone terraces, and down toward a broad grove where the scent of juniper and warm clay fills the air. Just ahead, half hidden by a row of cypress trees, is what you're looking for: a guest house near a shrine. Its modest stone columns, faded frescoes, a tiled roof, but its courtyard is shady and cool. The kind of place a traveler could doze through a summer afternoon without a care in the world. These weren't inns as we know them. Not exactly. They were Xenodokia public guest houses, often attached to temples or sanctuaries, where pilgrims and wanderers could sleep for free or for a symbolic offering. Not coins, usually. More like honey, a poem, or a loaf of barley bread. You step inside and feel the temperature drop. The air is still, peaceful. A woman in a teal chiton sits weaving on a low stool. She glances up and nods. No surprise. You're just another in a long line of dusty feet and sunburnt shoulders. Historians still debate when these guest houses started appearing. Some say the 6th century BCE. Others argue they were always part of temple complexes, just not always recorded. Either way, they were safe havens, places where strangers became guests, and guests became storytellers. In Olympia, for example, yes. Home of the Olympic Games, there were massive accommodations set aside for athletes, judges, and noble visitors. These weren't just sleeping mats in a corner. We're talking entire buildings with shaded porches, clay water basins, and communal kitchens that likely smelled of lentils and ambition. You walk through the courtyard, brushing your hand along the ivy-covered wall, and imagine the layers of history here. Maybe a philosopher once sat on that bench, debating the ethics of napping. Maybe a merchant from Rhodes once dozed off mid-tale and got sunburned on only one arm. These places were filled with life, and more importantly, with pause. Because these weren't spots for action. They were places for recovery, for digestion, for dreaming. A rooster crows from somewhere beyond the wall. You follow the sound until you reach the small garden out back, where a man is refilling a clay basin from a bronze pitcher. He offers it to you with a simple gesture, and you drink. The water tastes of mint and sun. You feel it slide all the way down into your bones. There's a row of low sleeping platforms shaded by linen canopies. A couple of travelers rest there now, snoring softly, sandals tossed aside. One clutches a satchel with what looks suspiciously like papyrus scrolls. The other holds a small wooden flute. You lie down on an empty cot. It creaks. The linen smells of thyme and oddly figs. You sigh and close your eyes, and for a moment, everything makes sense. The gods needed temples, heroes needed songs, but people, they needed this: a quiet place to sleep. You wake to the gentle hush of cicadas and a breeze lifting the edge of the linen canopy. The world hasn't changed much, but you feel different. Lighter? Calmer? Like a clay jug freshly emptied and set back on its shelf. The sun hangs lower now, late afternoon casting amber light across the courtyard. You sit up slowly, stretch, and rub your eyes. Another traveler nods at you from across the way, gray-haired, sandal-strapped, scribbling something into a wax tablet with sleepy determination. It's time to move again, but not without a proper goodbye. You circle back toward the main hall of the guest house, where a carved stone altar sits near the entrance, low and square, its surface worn smooth by countless hands. This isn't a shrine to a major god. There's no statue, no trumpet-blowing priests, just an offering space for travelers to leave thanks. It's not required, but it's tradition. You reach into your satchel and pull out a dried date and a single copper coin. Carefully, you place both on the altar and bow your head, silently thanking whoever decided this place should exist. In ancient Greece, this simple act was part of a broader ritual of guest acknowledgement. These weren't check-in desks or tips for housekeeping. They were offerings tokens left for the divine, or to honor the spirit of the place itself. A way of saying, I passed through, I am grateful. May the next traveler be safe. And the offerings could be as humble as a sprig of lavender, or as personal as a carved shell from home. There's even a fragment of text that suggests some guests left poems, scribbled lines of verse to entertain the gods or make fellow pilgrims laugh. Imagine checking into a place where the walls are lined not with room numbers, but with bad haikus and thank you notes. Historians still argue whether these practices were religious obligations or early expressions of communal memory. But one thing's certain: ancient travelers didn't just move across land, they moved through ritual. Their footsteps formed patterns. Their nights carved meaning. You step outside into the golden glow and follow a narrow road lined with cypress trees. It leads away from the village toward a hill overlooking the valley. Halfway up, nestled among the olive groves, stands a modest temple with whitewashed walls and a roof the color of sunburnt clay. This one is dedicated to Asclepius, god of healing. And as you approach, you notice it's not just a temple, it's a resting place. People lie in shaded porticos, some wrapped in linen, others with herbs laid across their foreheads. Because this was another kind of guest house one where the gods were physicians, and sleep itself was medicine. You wander among the colonnades and hear soft prayers drifting on the wind. The priests here didn't just perform rituals, they read dreams. They believed that in sacred sleep, the god would visit, whisper cures, or plant healing visions. They even had a name for it: incubation, a divine sleepover with health insurance. You chuckle softly at the thought as you sit beneath a fig tree and close your eyes. Just for a moment, and somewhere, behind your closed lids, you imagine a figure in white robes, silver staff in hand, brushing your brow and muttering something in Greek. You don't quite understand, but somehow feel. Because sometimes the best way to be healed is to rest, and sometimes the most sacred act is to nap. You wake gently beneath the fig tree, sunlight now mellow and golden, brushing across your face like a whisper. A breeze stirs the branches above, and a fig plops softly to the ground beside you, perfectly ripe, as if offered by the tree itself. You pick it up, take a bite, and the sweetness makes your eyes flutter closed again. Just for a second. But there's more to see. Your feet carry you down from the hill, across a narrow stone bridge, and toward one of the most famous destinations in ancient Greece, Olympia. Not just the birthplace of the Olympic Games, but also one of the first places where hospitality was elevated to an architectural art. You step into the Leonidaion, a massive guest house built for visiting VIPs during the Pan-Hellenic festivals. Columns rise in orderly ranks around a grand courtyard, and tiled roofs shelter rows of sleeping quarters. The stone still hums with ancient footsteps. You can almost hear the rustle of linen tunics, the clink of amphorae, the murmured bets placed on which athlete might win the discus throw. Visitors came from every corner of the Greek world: Sparta, Athens, Delphi, even beyond the Aegean. And Olympia welcomed them all. You walk slowly past an open chamber, its threshold worn smooth by sandals. Inside, woven mats lie side by side, and bronze jugs glint softly in the light. There's a shelf stacked with folded blankets. Well, okay, blanket-adjacent wool squares. Comfort, in the classical sense. There was no private bathroom, no room service. But there was a system, one that understood people didn't just come to Olympia for sport. They came to belong. Historians still argue whether the Leonidaion was free or required donations. Some inscriptions suggest high-status guests were invited as an honor, while others hint at fees voluntarily given in exchange for better pillows. You smirk. Even then, upgrades existed. But regardless of the details, the purpose was clear: hospitality on a grand scale. Hundreds of guests, all under one roof, protected by the gods and united by shared awe. And outside the guest house courtyards for conversation, shaded paths for strolling, fountains to cool your hands in. You find one now, its spout carved like a lion's mouth, spitting clear water into a stone basin. You rinse your face, and the chill wakes you up fully. You imagine yourself as one of those guests fresh off a dusty road. Scroll of recommendations tucked under your arm. Sandals worn from travel. You'd bathe in the river Alpheus, share olives with strangers, and find your spot on a sleeping mat beside a man who swears he saw Apollo once. On a Tuesday, the night before the games, people would stay up telling stories, tuning lyres, painting athlete names onto shards of pottery like fans scribbling on jerseys. And in the dark, there'd be that shared electricity, that expectation that something divine was about to happen. Because it wasn't just sport, it was sacred competition and sacred rest. You glance toward the edge of the courtyard and spot a small altar, half hidden by vines. Someone's left an offering, a bunch of dried grapes and a tiny folded cloth. A thank you? A prayer? Maybe both. And as you turn to leave, you pause to look back at the building one last time. No flashing signs, no velvet ropes. Just stone, sunlight, and a centuries-old invitation. Come in. Lay down. Be part of something bigger than yourself. You leave Olympia behind as the sky shifts into soft lavender tones. That fleeting hour when everything feels a little timeless. Shadows stretch long across the path, and your feet carry you downhill toward a smaller, quieter village that hugs the edge of a vineyard. The air smells like sun-warmed grapes and distant bread ovens. You could sleep right here in the dirt and probably be fine. But luckily, someone's built a roof nearby. The building looks unremarkable at first glance: low stone walls, flat roof, 2 wooden shutters flung open to catch the breeze. But the sign above the door tells a different story. Not a painted board or carved slab. No. This innkeeper's announcement is etched in verse, chiseled into the lintel in rustic meter. If your legs are tired and your coin is few, sleep here tonight, and dreams come true. Inside, a man in a leather apron is rearranging clay cups on a shelf. His beard is too neat for a farmer, too wild for a priest. You know immediately this is your Cathagogius, the ancient Greek equivalent of a hotel manager. Part host, part problem solver, part gossip collector. He greets you with a nod and gestures to the low table, already laid with olives, goat cheese, and a bit of wine that's clearly been sampled for quality control. You sit. He pours, no questions asked, just service delivered with a practiced efficiency. These kinds of inns began popping up more frequently in the classical and Hellenistic periods, especially near major crossroads or festival routes. They weren't luxurious, but they were consistent. They had rules. A kind of ancient hospitality protocol: don't start fights, don't steal the blankets, and don't flirt with the innkeeper's niece. Historians still argue whether these establishments were run privately, municipally, or as part of temple networks. But one thing is clear: someone had to be in charge. Someone had to know how much wine to pour and when to gently eject a traveler who'd had a bit too much. The Cathagogus was that someone. You watch him now as he ducks behind a curtain to check on sleeping mats. He returns with a wool blanket that smells of cedar and thyme and hands it to you without a word. No tip required? No clipboard to sign? This wasn't just customer service. This was a calling. Outside, you hear the clatter of hooves and the cheerful cursing of a cart driver trying to back his donkey into a courtyard. The innkeeper doesn't even blink. He walks to the door, shouts a single name, and a boy comes sprinting to help. Within seconds, the donkey is led away, the cart unloaded, and fresh straw spread for the animals. Like clockwork, you sit back and sip your wine, because here, in this humble inn, tucked between vineyard rows and sacred hills, you are not just a passerby. You are part of the rhythm. The innkeeper joins you at the table, carving a fig with a small bronze knife. From the gods. Everything, he says, placing a slice on your plate. From man. Just enough. You nod, and under the soft torchlight, you both eat in companionable silence. Later, he'll show you to your mat. He'll offer a bucket of warm water to wash your feet. He'll whisper a quick prayer to Hestia before banking the hearth for the night. And you'll sleep deeply, safely, dreaming of sandals, songs, and the quiet power of people who know exactly when you need to rest. You wake before dawn this time, not from discomfort, but because of a smell, a good smell. Something sweet and sharp floating through the air like a whisper from Olympus. You open your eyes to find the hearth already glowing, and the Cathagogius gently stirring a pot with a wooden spoon. Fig and goat milk, he mutters, not bothering to turn. With a little clove, good for the nerves. You sit up slowly, the wool blanket still wrapped around your shoulders. Your joints creak a bit, but in that satisfying way that says, I slept, and I slept well. The inn is quiet except for the pop of firewood and the faint sound of someone snoring in the next room. You pad across the stone floor barefoot and accept the steaming bowl offered without ceremony. The breakfast is simple porridge, fruit, a drizzle of honey, but it hits you like a lullaby. Food meant not to impress, but to comfort. This was no accident. Ancient inns knew what travelers needed, and often it wasn't grandeur. It was care. You glance around at the other signs, a jar of sweet wine in the corner, loosely corked, a folded cloth that smells faintly of lavender, a pile of lemon balm leaves crushed beside a stone basin, used not only to flavor but to soothe aching feet. Hospitality wasn't just ritual here, it was sensory. Greeks believed a guest should be relaxed in both body and spirit, and so early lodgings evolved their own little luxuries. Take the perfumed linens records suggest some inns scented their sleeping mats with rosemary or marjoram. Or fig snacks before bed, not just a treat, but considered digestion aids to prevent dreams of flying turtles or awkward reunions with in-laws. Historians still debate whether these touches were widespread or reserved for elite travelers. But pottery shards and written accounts suggest they were surprisingly common proof that even in the most modest guest houses, the human need for comfort prevailed. The innkeeper returns with a thin cloth soaked in warm water and nods at your face. "Eyes look tired," he says, and offers it like a doctor prescribing medicine. You press the cloth to your temples and close your eyes. It smells of mint and lemon. Outside, the first birds start calling to each other in the trees. The sky behind the hills begins to blush, pale pink to lavender to gold. A new day, a new road ahead, but not quite yet. You savor another bite of the porridge and lean back, eyes drifting toward the beams of the ceiling. You wonder who else has stared at those beams before you. Who else sighed the same sighs of relief? Who else clutched their travel bag and thought, "This is enough"? Because sometimes a mat and a bowl and a soft cloth are as divine as marble pillars and ambrosia, and sometimes the people who offer them quietly, consistently are closer to gods than they'll ever admit. You set down your bowl, tie your sandals, and prepare to go. The Cathagogius offers you a fig wrapped in a fig leaf. A parting gift. You nod. From the gods, he smiles. From the cook's garden. But who's to say you step out into the morning light with the fig still tucked in your palm, warm from your grasp? The road ahead stretches toward the sea blue glinting just over the hills, but your thoughts linger behind you, in the scent of mint water and the rustle of clean linen. Not every guest was so respectful, though. As you follow the path toward the coast, you start to recall the tales of the troublesome guests, those who forgot the sacred trust between host and traveler, who twisted Xenia into an excuse for indulgence, or worse, like the man who tried to seduce a temple priestess under the guise of being a foreign dignitary. He brought gifts, sure-dried figs, pressed olive oil, but also brought trouble. When the deception was revealed, the gods punished him, not with lightning, but with something more poetic, an eternal longing for love he could never touch. To this day, his statue stands in a grove near Thebes, carved with hands outstretched toward nothing. You smirk as you walk. Even the gods had limits. Hospitality wasn't blind generosity. It was a balance. Guests had responsibilities too. In Athens, guests were expected to show moderation, respect, and gratitude. Refusing food, talking too much politics, or drinking yourself under the table was considered bad form. Flirting with your host's spouse, legendary disaster. There's even a fragment of a comic play where a guest tries to recite poetry while hiccuping through wine fumes. Let's just say the reviews were mixed. And don't forget the poor innkeepers. They saw it all. One record from Corinth describes a guest who refused to leave after 3 nights. He kept inventing reasons to stay: bad weather, an injured foot, emotional processing. Finally, the innkeeper baked a loaf of barley bread filled with hot mustard and gave it to him without warning. Problem solved. Historians still argue whether that story is true or just a brilliant example of culinary revenge. Either way, it worked. You pass a wayside shrine with an offering bowl still half filled from last night. A traveler has left a string of garlic and a polished stone. Not flashy, but meaningful. You drop a small olive branch beside it and whisper a quiet thanks, not to the gods this time, but to the hosts. Because every good journey is made better by those who open their doors, and every myth worth hearing has at least one scene involving awkward guests, like the one who insisted on sleeping in the temple courtyard. Despite the signs clearly saying no dreaming here. Supposedly, he woke up cursed to smell faintly of onions for the rest of his life. A soft punishment, but effective. You chuckle to yourself as a breeze picks up, cooling your face, Your sandals thump steadily along the dirt path. And as the sea draws nearer, glittering like spilled bronze, you think of all the stops still ahead, each one a new bed, a new table, a new fire to warm your feet beside. But you also think of the rules you carry with you, silent and ancient. Be humble, be kind, and for the love of Zeus, don't overstay your welcome. The sea air grows saltier as you descend toward the coast, the path now flanked by shrubs and low rock walls. Waves flash between cypress trunks ahead, and you can almost hear them gentle and rhythmic, like the breath of something ancient. As you round a bend, you spot another shrine, small, sun-bleached, and marked by dozens of tiny offering seashells, pebbles, even a few knotted ribbons. But what catches your eye is the inscription carved into the stone base. For those who gave nothing, charming. You pause and sit beside it, curious. These weren't shrines to heroes or gods. They were cautionary. Warnings? Really reminders of what happened when Xenia went wrong. Because while the Greeks revered hospitality, they loved stories of what happened when it was violated. Nothing entertained quite like a tale of rude hosts who paid the price. You remember one story, told in hushed tones, a wealthy man who refused shelter to a weary traveler, slamming the door in his face and mocking his dirty feet. The traveler, of course, was Zeus in disguise. Within the hour, the man's prized olive tree burst into flames. His goats all grew hoarse. His bathwater turned into vinegar. Historians still argue whether such stories were morality tales or social control mechanisms. The takeaway was always the same: be kind or be cursed. And those curses were rarely fire and brimstone. No. Greek punishment was far more poetic. One host gave watered-down wine to a traveling bard. That bard composed a song about his stinginess, which became wildly popular in the local taverns. His name, forever rhymed with cheap figs, was ruined. Another refused to wash the feet of an old woman who had walked 3 days barefoot. That woman turned out to be Hera, who promptly made every loaf of bread in the house rise too much, then fall flat in the oven, ruined his bakery, his pride, and his marriage. Petty maybe, but effective. You run your fingers along the shrine's edge. There's something comforting in how the Greeks didn't just idolize the noble or brave. They mocked the rude, the selfish, the inhospitable. They made legends out of laughter and long memory. Further down the coast, you reach a seaside village known for its wild thyme and long naps. The people here say the winds sing if you listen carefully at night. A fisherman invites you in, offers you grilled octopus, and gestures toward a sleeping mat in the corner without even asking your name. The circle continues, and in that moment, sitting cross-legged on a wooden floor with your hands greasy from oil and sea salt, you realize something. Maybe the curse isn't being punished by the gods. Maybe the real curse is never being welcomed in again. You reach into your satchel and leave a token on the windowsill before bed. A fragment of pottery etched with a single word, Haris Grace. Because sometimes the smallest gestures echo loudest, and sometimes a night of kindness becomes a story worth remembering for centuries. The stars have taken their places, now scattered silver across a deep violet sky. You lie on your borrowed mat, head resting on a folded cloak, the salty breeze carrying hints of charcoal and oregano from someone's distant cooking fire. The village has gone quiet, save for the gentle snore of the fisherman's dog nearby. And still, your mind wanders. Not to war, not to politics, but to the philosophers, those thoughtful, sandal-wearing types who believed sleep wasn't just necessary, it was meaningful. In ancient Greece, rest wasn't just a biological function. It was a mirror of the soul. Plato wrote about dreams as reflections of inner truth. Aristotle believed sleep was when the body's internal heat retreated inward to digest not just food, but thought. You imagine Socrates in his robes, stretching out beneath a tree after hours of arguing in the agora, muttering to himself, "Am I asleep? Or am I merely more awake now?" You smile. Philosophers loved a good nap. And a better question. One lesser-known thinker, Epimenides, reportedly slept for 57 years in a cave. When he awoke, he claimed to have met divine beings and come back with prophecies and dietary recommendations. Historians still argue whether this was literal sleep, poetic license, or a very long mushroom trip. But the point stands, sleep was seen as transformative. You roll to your side and stare at the ceiling beam. Somewhere beyond it, stars are turning. And somewhere in Athens, perhaps a scroll still survives describing the layout of ideal sleeping quarters, north-facing windows, clean wool bedding, and a touch of oil on the temples to encourage pleasant visions. Even the Stoics, those famously serious, emotionally bulletproof thinkers, valued a good night's rest. Seneca said, "He who sleeps well, lives well." Okay, technically he was Roman, but let's not split philosophical hairs tonight. The more you reflect on it, the clearer it becomes. Rest was not laziness. It was a kind of wisdom, a ritual, an alignment between body and world, like music that only played once the mind stopped racing. And the environment mattered. Rooms were swept before bed. Lamps were extinguished carefully. Scented herbs were burned, especially myrtle, marjoram, and bay to ward off nightmares or invite divine dreams. You remember a tale now less of a myth, more of a bedtime rumor? A woman who dreamed of Athena every time she slept with a sprig of mint under her pillow? No one believed her? Of course. Until she started solving riddles no one else could answer. Coincidence or just a well-rested brain? You shift again, the mat beneath you still holding a hint of warmth. Somewhere, an owl calls once low and throaty. Then silence returns, and in that silence, the full strangeness of it settles over you that in a world of thunder gods, sea monsters, and prophetic goats, the simple act of sleeping well was considered sacred. You close your eyes and breathe slowly, because maybe tomorrow you'll walk again. Maybe you'll argue with a philosopher. Maybe you'll sleep beneath a different roof. But tonight, you rest with the confidence of Socrates mid-question, the stillness of a temple courtyard, and the unmistakable blessing of having found a quiet space beneath the stars. Dawn once again peeks through the shutters, soft and tentative, like a polite guest unsure if you're ready to be greeted. You blink awake slowly, still wrapped in the scent of salt and fig wood, your borrowed cloak slightly askew. The fisherman's dog now curled against your legs. You rise with a stretch, bones gently protesting, and quietly fold the blanket. The floor creaks under your feet as you tiptoe past the hearth, where someone's already left out a small bowl of olives and barley bread, a gift for the road, or a gentle reminder that you were welcomed here. You take it with quiet gratitude. Outside, the sea gleams like hammered bronze. Seabirds call lazily overhead, and the path beckons again. But before you go, you glance back one last time at the simple home with its open shutters, its sleeping dog, and its open-hearted silence. You've walked through sacred hearths and temple guest houses, through myths disguised as inns and philosophy disguised as rest. But as your sandals crunch on the gravel road, one final thought stays with you. None of it was accidental. The ancient Greeks didn't just stumble upon the idea of hospitality. They built it, they believed in it, and they ritualized it because they understood what the world does to travelers. They knew how long the roads could be, how harsh the sun, how tight the shoulders after a night under the stars. And so they created places where the body could rest and the soul could sigh, whether you were a farmer, a poet, or a god in disguise. Historians still argue when the first hotel truly appeared. Was it the guest pavilions of Olympia, the Xenodikeia near temple sites, the private homes that became unofficial inns on festival routes? But maybe the first hotel wasn't a building at all. Maybe it was a gesture, a bowl of figs, a warm mat, a place at the fire with no questions asked. And maybe, just maybe, what they really invented was the idea that rest could be sacred. You take a bite of the bread, and it's dry but good. The sun climbs, and you walk on, carrying not just stories, but something older, the memory of sleep shared across centuries, and the invisible welcome that still waits on every well-worn path. And now, as your eyes grow heavier, let all those flickering scenes soften and blur. The firelight in the guest house, the curve of a fig tree, the glint of a bronze bowl in a quiet courtyard. Let them all recede gently into the folds of memory, like dreams tucked into linen. You've walked through myths tonight, not the loud ones with swords and storms, but the quiet ones that hum beneath them. The myths of beds and benches, of warm cheese and borrowed blankets. The ones that speak not of power, but of kindness. So, wherever you are on a train, in your room, wrapped up in a blanket, imagine yourself on that sacred road again. Imagine a door opening without fear, a hearth crackling in welcome, a mat prepared just for you, still warm from sunlight and story. Let your thoughts slow, like sandals left at the threshold. Let your breathing deepen, like a tide gently pulling back from the shore. You are safe here. You are welcome here. You are not alone. And as the stars slip behind the horizon and the first hints of dawn arrive in silence, rest in the knowledge that this world still holds places of peace. Sometimes in temples, sometimes in tales, sometimes simply in sleep. So go ahead, Drift.